You ever look at a book and think, it's not you, it's me. My tiny little pea brain can't handle all these pages. It's like an encyclopedia. Well, in this video, I'm gonna give spoiler-free summaries and every reason why these 10 popular books have been collecting dust on my TBR for months now, aside from them being absolute units. Let's get into it. The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. 1,280 pages, and this is in the epic fantasy genre. A fallen soldier, a troubled noble, and a mysterious scholar each uncover ancient secrets that could reshape their war-torn world. Their paths collide in an epic saga of magic, honor, and destiny. So I recently finished Brandon Sanderson's trilogy called Mistborn. This is usually the first Brandon Sanderson book that people recommend to read, and I listened to the people. And the people were right. These slapped, indubitably. Like 30 pages into Mistborn, I was already bought in on Brandon Sanderson. I absolutely loved his writing style. It's so conversational, and I feel like he does a good job to like handhold the reader. Not too much, but a little bit in terms of reiterating what the metals do and what powers they grant Allomancers in Mistborn, and what's the difference of an Allomancer in Mistborn. What's the relevance to this character and that character? He just does a good job in like checking in and giving like subtle reminders so that you don't feel lost. And as a reader who is generally in the beginning stages of my reading career, I'm not that literate, I guess you would say. I liked the little bit of hand-holding, at least, that I got in Mistborn. Not to say this is like a beginner book or an easy book to read. The world building in this book was crazy. The characters were awesome. Everything was so well fleshed out. But the reason that I read Mistborn is because it was only 460 pages. And that's crazy that I'm saying only 460 pages, but that's generally pretty short in terms of these like epic fantasies. So this was a great first step into Brandon Sanderson. Each book was like a 4.3 star and above for me. And in a way, now I feel like my Brandon Sanderson training wheels are off and I'm ready to like explore his other work. So I'm not sure if I want to read like one of his standalones like Warbreaker or Yumi in the Nightmare Painter, but obviously Brandon Sanderson's magnum opus is the Stormlight Archives. And the Stormlight Archives begin with Way of Kings. Way of Kings, though, is 1,280 pages, which is still like 200 pages longer than two of the first Mistborns smushed together. So in my opinion, if I start The Way of Kings, I know I'm gonna love The Way of Kings because I loved Mistborn. Even if I don't even love it as much as I loved Mistborn, it's still gonna be an awesome read. But that's kind of like the reason why I don't want to read it. Because if I read Way of Kings, I'm just signing myself up to read all of Stormlight Archives, which is, I believe, 6 books of all equally size. I'm pretty sure the most recent book is like 1,400 pages. They're all over 1,000 pages. 750 pages is the longest book I've read, and this book is still 500 pages longer than that. 530 if you be exact. I was in honors geometry in high school, so you know your boy can do the numbers. So yeah, it's just a massive time commitment to begin the Stormlight Archives. It's not an if, it's just a when, but I just don't know when that when's gonna be. And I'm really afraid that the Stormlight Archives might end up like Breaking Bad ended up for me. I think I might have talked about this in another video, but I know I would love the show Breaking Bad. I know it's an amazing show. It won a ton of awards and it was hugely popular. And I told myself I'd watch it one day. And the show's been over for more than a decade now and I still haven't watched it. I'm hoping Stormlight Archives does not equal Breaking Bad for me. I'm gonna read it, but kind of the qualms that I hear about Stormlight is that it can be a slow burn. Like the pacing is not always fast because I'm sure you can't have a super fast paced book when it's literally 1,000 pages long. If that book was 100% action, we'd just rename it The Rage of Dragons, because that book's got a lot of action. That book's all action. No one's calling The Rage of Dragons a slow burn. Also, I know that the world building is gonna be epic. It's gonna be huge, immersive, and that's gonna take me into a whole different kind of universe as I'm reading, which is a good thing, don't get me wrong, but it is like another commitment of like learning all this stuff and really trying to absorb and understand the material and give it the respect it deserves. Put some respect on whatever the planet Stormlight's on. I know that this is a very character-driven book, like the characters, people love them. And the crazy thing is I can't even tell you one name of one character in the Stormlight Archives. I'm so good at keeping myself an arm's length away because if I hear anything about the story and any sort of spoiler, I'm not gonna want to read it. It's kind of why I probably haven't watched Breaking Bad. I know the ending. And similar with Stormlight, I know that the most recent book was pretty poorly received. And generally the consensus for why it was poorly received was that it was so damn long. But yeah, I know nothing about the plot, know nothing about the characters, know nothing about nothing. with the Stormlight archives. My brother actually recently read The Way of Kings and essentially told me it lived up to the hype. I'm not surprised. Me and him have very similar tastes, so again, just reaffirming that I am gonna want to crush this series. And honestly, now that I have this booktube, I want to keep my reading diverse. I don't want to just talk about one book series the whole time. So that's kind of another reason why I don't want to start Stormlight. Because if I'm being honest with myself, it's gonna take me like a month and a half to read that first book. It takes me about 2 weeks to read a 550-page book. So yeah, it'll take at least a month for me to finish Stormlight. And the summer's coming up. In the winter in Massachusetts, it gets dark at literally 3:30. So I had nothing else to do but read. So yeah, I got other interests. I'm gonna be going away on the weekend. I'm gonna be doing fun things in the summer, trying to enjoy my time. So maybe reading won't be my #1 priority. So I feel like I need to save Stormlight for once it starts to get chilly out again. All that being said, I am so excited to start it. Every time I finish a book, I'm like, should I? Is today the day that I start Stormlight? But then I always push it off and go for a more svelte book, a slimmer book, because I'm simply not built like that right now. I don't know if my attention span could really handle Stormlight. Or maybe I'm just telling myself that. Sometimes you're more afraid to succeed than you are to fail. And I feel like in my instance right now, maybe I'm too afraid to succeed with Stormlight. Because again, I know it's just gonna lead to more Stormlight. All right, I think we can move on to the next one. I'm kind of rambling a little bit. That's gonna be a little bit of this video. I'm just kind of going off the cuff and my initial knee-jerk reactions, but I think we're good to move on to the next one, right? I think we should be all set. Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. 1,079 pages. This is like a literary fiction genre book. Set in an addiction recovery center and a tennis academy, this novel explores the pursuit of happiness and the nature of entertainment in a fragmented society. Complex, satirical, and thought-provoking. For whatever reason, I remember Googling books for men in their 20s, 8 years ago, whatever it was. And Infinite Jest would always pop up as something that was like a life-changing, mind-blowing book. And I actually remember downloading it on my Kindle. I had like a old school OG Kindle. And I'm pretty sure I read like 80 pages of it and had no idea how many pages I had left. I know I never finished it. I don't remember any of it at this point. Giving you that summary, I don't even know how accurate that is. Again, I just know that this is an insanely popular book that is like intellectual. I also hear that it's kind of non-linear. Maybe like the storyline isn't continuous. There's lots of footnotes, and some people feel like it can be pretentious. This is just like generally what I've heard. I guess those are more maybe negative things. But again, this is just something that I always told myself I would read one day, for whatever reason, and that reason is because I read literally one article about it. So it feels like something I need to complete in my life. Feels like, oh, it's a checkpoint that me in my 30s needs to complete to make me in my 20s proud. But if I'm being honest, I was just yapping about how like sick Stormlight is gonna be and how afraid I am to love it. I would say I feel the opposite about Infinite Jest. I don't feel the opposite about Infinite Jest. I just don't feel anything about Infinite Jest. There's the opposite of infinite feelings towards that book. I haven't even really thought about it until I remembered how bad I wanted to read it back in the day. It's this weird thing, like now every time I see it in the bookstore, it like brings back like nostalgia for some reason. Nostalgia for a book I've literally never really read. I feel like I'm like a Celtics team player, like looking up at the old school banners of like Larry Bird and Bill Russell winning championships, and I'm looking at Infinite Jest and be like, I'm gonna be up there one day. I'm gonna read your ass. Again, there's no timetable for when I'm gonna read this. I can't even imagine I wanna start it next year even, where I might start Stormlight within the next 8 months. I couldn't imagine starting Infinite Jest until I'm at least done with most of these fantasy and sci-fi series that I'm engrossed in. So in terms of all these humongous books that I want to read, Infinite Jest might be on the low end of my priority list, my TBR of the chunks, of the thickies. It's probably on the bottom. It's the caboose. But if you've read Infinite Jest and you feel strongly about why I should read it, let me know. Some of these books in this list have popped up countless times in my comments since starting this booktube. I don't think Infinite Jest has popped up once. Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, 960 pages. This is the Western/historical fiction genre. 2 retired Texas Rangers lead a grueling cattle drive from Texas to Montana, facing hardship, love, and loss along the way. This is a sweeping Western epic about friendship, survival, and the fading glory of the frontier. Lonesome Dove has been popping up in my life so much. This is one that people recommend all the time. This is one that some of my favorite booktubers like Tudor Ramble absolutely gushed about it. Did like a couple gushers about this book. I just mentioned my brother reading Way of Kings. He actually read Lonesome Dove right after it and said he's never fell in love with characters as much as he has in this. He said they're so well described. Whenever you hear of Larry McMurtry, you just hear about how well he writes characters. You do hear that about a lot of authors, but this guy, apparently everyone says his next level stuff. So these characters are written well. But what I'm afraid of, really deep down, is how much of a slow burn this is, how leisurely paced it goes. This thing won a Pulitzer Prize, so I'm sure there's a payoff for that leisurely pace. But for me, like, I'm literally coming off reading Rage of Dragons, which was high octane paced, and I loved every second of it. I could barely fall asleep. My heart was pounding so much reading that before bed. Lonesome Dove sounds like it's gonna rock me to sleep. I'm gonna read one page and be snoozing. For a 960 page book, that might not contribute well to me reading this in a reasonable time. In all seriousness, I know that this is an absolute banger of a book. For me personally, I'm not really that into Westerns, so that's kind of like a sticking point for me a little bit. Really the only Western themed movies I like, because I can only compare them to movies. I haven't read any Western themed books. I really like Django Unchained. That was an awesome movie. Jamie Foxx was great in that. Loved Red Dead Redemption. That game was sick. But besides those two right now, I can't think of any other Westerns that I enjoy. I'm not really like a his down ain't big enough for both of them guy. Westerns just don't hit that well for me as a guy who grew up in the suburbs of Massachusetts. Maybe it's just not relatable, I don't know. I know that's just like the backdrop of the story, and really the focus is probably more on the characters and their stories and their love and their loss and all those heartbreaking and memorable and uplifting things. It seems like you get all those emotions with this book, and it's getting a ton of flowers right now, probably for a reason. And the only reason it is on my TBR is obviously because of how much I'm seeing it pop up on BookTok and BookTube. So I'm totally being influenced. As someone who's early to the reading game, I only want to read books that I think are going to be 5-star books. Because if at any moment my kind of velocity for reading slows down, I could lose the habit of reading and loving to read every night that I have going. Because for me, that kind of happened when I read the book Empire of Silence. That's another super hyped book series, is the Sun Eater series by Christopher Rocchio. And Empire of Silence for me was really hard to get through. It's not that I didn't enjoy it, it was just dense and wordy and poetic and so much world building, and it's really, that book really just scratches the surface of the world building, but it was kind of slow. It was kind of a slow burn, and even the action scenes to me were described so poetically that it didn't give me that heart pumping feeling. It was just not like that testosterone built action scene that I get from books like Red Rising and Rage of Dragon. That being said, I still enjoyed that book, and I actually really liked the second book in that series. And the third book of that series is right here, and I'll talk about it later on this list because it's over 700 pages. But I would call that a slow burn. I'm afraid that Lonesome Dove is gonna be kind of that slog type read for me, like Empire of Silence was, where I didn't really want to read every night because it was really slow paced and nothing really happened. But I'm glad I read it. I'm glad I powered through because it ended up being a solid book, and the next book was really good, and I can't wait for the third one. I don't know if I'm ready for a slow paced long book right now that is set in a world, the West, that I'm not 100% interested in. I'm more interested in like a sci-fi world right now. So for those reasons, I'm out for now. This is no shade to the books. This is about me personally and how I know myself as a reader at this stage of my reading career. I got a pea brain that maybe has grown to like the size of a chickpea from being an original green pea. I need like a fava bean type brain before I delve into Lonesome Dove. Hopefully I'll get there one day. A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin, 720 pages. This is the epic fantasy genre. Noble houses battle for control of a divided kingdom, while a mysterious evil awakens in the north. Politics, betrayal, and prophecy intertwine in this gritty medieval fantasy. Already watched the show. Yeah, already watched the show. So I already know everything that's going to happen. And that is, again, like I mentioned that earlier, kind of a #1 reason why I might not want to read a book or watch a show or do anything. If I have a spoiler and I know the ending, what's the point? I know there's more details that I could derive from the book. I could love the book more than the show, which is gonna be tough because I loved the show. But from what I hear, the book is good. I've actually watched a couple videos on this recently, one from Haley Pham and then another from the Tutor Ramble guys, about their thoughts about Game of Thrones, and it seems like it's really good, but it's not hitting that 5-star tier for them, really, that one would expect from how popular that this book series was. Those two channels just talked about the first book specifically, so I'm sure it heats up as it did in the show. But Game of Thrones is an incredibly like political story. I never liked medieval kind of vibes until I watched this show, and now I fell in love with it, and I think that's why I like fantasy so much now, is because of Game of Thrones. So I have a lot of respect for the show and a lot of love and nostalgia. That being said, I just don't know if I want to read 720 pages of book 1 of 6 or 7 of a series that isn't even done yet. I think the last book has been being written for like 15 years now, and George R.R. Martin said there's no end in sight. So although the show had an ending that a lot of people were not happy about, the books don't have an ending yet. We don't know how George R.R. Martin's gonna end the books. Probably isn't gonna end it like the show because so many people were pissed about that. So that's kind of exciting to know that the ending could be totally different and maybe more satisfying than the HBO series was. And that's kind of the only reason I would maybe even potentially want to start reading this book. And it actually kind of is a huge reason why I'd want to read it, is the hopes that it would be different. But that leaves so much room for disappointment if the last book is just as mid as the show's ending. From what I know about Game of Thrones, this is just like a multiple POV book. So in different chapters, you're reading from Jon Stark, you're reading from Arya, you're reading from Cersei, Jaime Lannister. I think you get the POVs from everyone. So that's really cool to be in the mind of these characters, especially the more nefarious ones. I'm so curious how Jon Snow comes off in the book versus, you know, the show. He's kind of this hero. Although he's kind of pouty. People forget how pouty he was in the first season. I know that in the books, they're all like 15. And in the show, the actors are like 30. So that's weird. But yeah, the plot of this show is nuts. I mean, most people know how Game of Thrones is, know about the White Walkers and know about the Lannisters and the Starks and Westeros. Like, it's all so cool. And it would be kind of fun to re-enter that world that I have been away from for 8 years now, that I was obsessed with for a long time. So that might be fun to re-enter that world. But again, with these books that I'm reading so many like banger fantasy series right now. The Will of the Many, that was book 1 in the series. The second book's coming out soon. I was talking about Sun Eater. Even that is so expansive, and I'm on book 3 where people said it's really gonna heat up. I just started Jade City and Dungeon Crawler Carl. There's like 8 of those books. Obviously, I'm a Red Rising stan, waiting for that last book to come out. I just know that I'm in love with so many book series that I just would be silly to start a series that I already know so many plot lines and how they go and what character dies and doesn't die and what character betrays another. Like, it's gonna be, if not the same, it's going to be very similar to the show. But if you're like me and you have watched Game of Thrones but want more of that world, maybe like a spin-off. I actually read this book. It is A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. It is like a spin-off, prequel kind of book that is totally separate from the events of Game of Thrones, but gives you that vibe of Game of Thrones, and it has pictures. So that's pretty sick. Also by George R.R. Martin. Yeah, they're awesome. I really enjoyed that. I read that years ago. That's one of the first books I could get through when I didn't even have a pea brain. I had a speckle of pepper brain at that point for reading, and I finished that book. So if you want some of that Game of Thrones vibe but don't want to commit to Game of Thrones and the 600-800 books that come with it, read A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, because I think that's like 300 and something pages for 3 short stories that are pretty sick. The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien, 531 pages. This is the high fantasy genre. Frodo Baggins inherits a powerful ring and sets out on a perilous journey to destroy it, accompanied by a fellowship of a diverse cast of characters. So this is the first book in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And admittedly, this book isn't humongous compared to the other books on this. It's still pretty long, 530 pages. This book is a classic fantasy book. And while I just talked a lot about Game of Thrones and how I know the plot lines and character arcs and all that kind of stuff. I've seen the first 2 Lord of the Rings movies, and I'm not 100% certain that I've seen the third one. I just recently watched the second one like 3 months ago. I rewatched the first one like a year ago, and I don't know if I've seen the third one ever. I really don't even know how it ends. If I'm thinking on the top of my head, I don't know how it ends. For all the reasons I just said that I don't want to read that Game of Thrones series, and also the fact that there's only 3 Lord of the Rings books, I'm low-key like itching to read Lord of the Rings a little bit. See what Frodo and the guys are up to in book 3. You know, I don't really remember. Maybe when I'm reading it, it'll all come back to me, but you know, it's been long enough that I can't off the top of my head say what happens at the end. And I wouldn't anyway, I don't want to spoil it for you guys. But yeah, Lord of the Rings, man, I mean, that's a classic. That inspired so many fantasies as we see them today. So as someone who's really getting into fantasy right now, it makes sense for me to read kind of the inspiration material for all these books that I've been reading that have been released in the last like decade, have drawn a lot of their themes and motifs and character arcs and all that jazz from Lord of the Rings, baby. I will say that the Lord of the Rings movies, when I rewatched them, they didn't really hit that hard for me. I watched the second one directly after watching both Dunes. So I watched Dune 1 and then Dune 2, and then I watched Lord of the Rings 2 the third night. That was kind of a tough spot for Lord of the Rings to be in right there after those 2 banger of movies, especially Dune 2. I don't have like a super connection with Lord of the Rings. I respect it from afar. I've consumed some of it, but I don't feel like a fanship or like a stanship like I do with Game of Thrones. All that being said, if I read the book, maybe I will. There's opportunity for the book to really just blow me away, to really just like, in my head, it's a little more whimsical than Game of Thrones, where Game of Thrones is really gritty with the dragons and the dire wolves and the White Walkers. Lord of the Rings kind of reminds me more of like a traditional fantasy with like goblins and elves and Frodo Baggins and Smeagol. So it has a little more whimsy to it. Maybe that's why I'm not as connected. I think I like my fantasy books like I like my basketball players. Gritty. Shout out Marcus Smart. Shout out Tony Allen. Dune by Frank Herbert. 896 pages. This is the science fiction genre and like the space opera genre. Young Paul Atreides is thrust into power on a desert planet where political, religious, and ecological forces all are fighting over control of the universe's most valuable resource. Sand. No, spice. It's a story of destiny, rebellion, and transformation, for better or for worse. I know I mentioned Dune earlier, the movies, they were awesome. This is a similar story as the previous 2 book series, so I will kind of be quick with this one. Long story short, I already know the lore of these books. I know the plot points, I know the characters. The movies were bangers. I know Paul Atreides is Timothée Chalamet. I know Zendaya is Ren? I don't know, I forgot her name. The weird thing with Dune is that I believe there's like 7 or 8 of them. I don't know everything, so I could be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure that the first handful were written by Frank Herbert, and then the most recent ones are written by his son, and I don't think people like the more recent ones as much. And so a lot of people will tell you to stop reading after, I believe, the 3rd book, and they're just kind of say like, we just kind of forget about the other books. It's a little bit like the seasons of The Office when after Michaels leaves. I feel like that's kind of the vibe I'm getting with the Dune books and people's perceptions of them. They're like, we just only really consider Dune these 3 books. We only consider The Office all the seasons that Steve Carell's in. But yeah, Dune, it was so cool and so expansive and philosophical, really cool world building and super complex characters, cool bad guys. So all things leading to like thumbs up. I'm all in my ballpark of things I might be interested in. If I'm gonna list the wantingness to read for like these 3 classic books, I'd probably say Lord of the Rings is 1, Dune is 2, Game of Thrones is the caboose. And we're gonna move on from these like classic books and onto a totally different genre. 11/22/63 by Stephen King. 849 pages. Historical fiction kind of book genre. A teacher discovers a time portal and tries to prevent the assassination of former President John F. Kennedy. But the past doesn't want to be changed. The past is like, nah, I ain't changing for no one. I'm staying right here. So I think that like comes into play a little bit. So this is a story about time travel and like historical drama. So Stephen King is known for his horror books. Myself, I'm not totally into horror books or horror movies or horror anything. I like things that aren't scary. I don't like being scared, especially because I read before bed. The only time I've read a book that was horror, it was actually even like a comedy horror book. I had the weirdest nightmares. So I'm kind of all good with reading horror for the time being, even though I am getting a little bit more interested in reading it because I am wanting to read Stephen King really bad. And that's why 11/22/63 is on this list, because I'm getting the benefit of reading Stephen King, but getting him in a genre I like a little bit more, because this does have sci-fi elements of it with the time travel, because that's like a futuristic idea. I actually also bought the book Billy Summers. So this book sounds super interesting to me, and I would read it straight away if it was 450 pages or less. This would be my next book because it's a standalone. A lot of guys say like this is a guy's book. Dudes will like this book because dudes love history. Like guys love history, guys love sports, guys love sci-fi a lot of the times. We love aliens and spaceships. So this kind of has like some of those elements to it. But again, it's just like 300 pages longer than I want it to be. And it's just a massive time commitment. Even though I feel like I would prefer to read a 900-page standalone and feel that sense of completion and kind of get that closure from finishing this book rather than reading a 1,200-page book one of a 7-book series. So actually, maybe that's a point in 11/22/63's favor, is the fact that it is one book and you get some sort of closure, I'm sure, at the end. That being said, I've been wanting to read, like I said, Stephen King, and wanting to read a standalone. So 2 things I want to do. And I found this book, Billy Summers, which is also heavily recommended, but recommended slightly less than 11/22/63. And I bought it because it was $9, and it is like 500 pages. So you got to realize that this other book is another like that many pages on top of this book. It's a lot. So I'm probably gonna read Billy Summers within the next few books I read. So within the next month or so. 11/22/63. I'd love to read that this year. I feel like I will, but just not yet. My first taste of Stephen King is probably gonna be Billy Summers, for better or for worse. A Little Life by Hania Yanagihara, 832 pages. This is a literary fiction genre. 4 college friends build their lives in the Big Apple, the city that never sleeps, New York City. But one of them harbors unimaginable trauma. This is a devastating book about pain, love, and the endurance of the human spirit. Been seeing this all over booktube. Honestly, I just heard this book was really sad. Really, really sad and a hard read. I mean, look at the cover. This dude's literally crying in the cover, and you're gonna tell me that this book isn't sad? You're wrong. If that's not a warning of how you're gonna feel and look when you're reading this book, I don't know what is. It's heavy content, like really graphic trauma. It's emotionally exhausting from start to finish. These are all things that I've heard from watching some reviews on this. But that being said, I've heard it really resonates with people. It's like a very important story to read. Although it's really heavy, you know, sometimes you have to read that. Sometimes you have to put yourself in those kind of stories, because although your life might not have similar trauma, you'll get some empathy for people who have to deal with those things. I don't know, I don't want to compare it to this, but like, I think of the movie A Beautiful Boy all the time with Timothée Chalamet. I mentioned it twice in this video. And Steve Carell, who I also, this is the second time mentioning him too, that's weird. That movie like gave me a lot of empathy for people who are dealing with drug addiction and how it can affect a family, how it can affect decisions, and obviously how it doesn't mean the person's a bad person, but it's just something that they're struggling with, and the whole family has to kind of deal with and hope to find a solution and hope to make this life a life worth living. That movie really impacted me, and I think about it from time to time, and I feel like this book is going to be something similar. Earlier this year, I read a really heavy book, All the Colors of the Dark by Chris Whitaker. It's also another really big one. This is over 600 pages. But it read really fast to me because it was super heavy in the topics and themes and everything I don't even want to get into. Like, it covers a lot, and it was really hard to read. I didn't enjoy a second of reading it, but I also couldn't put it down because I wanted to see where the characters ended up. But you're just reading a lot of struggle and a lot of trauma and a lot of bad things happening to pretty good people. Again, sometimes you gotta read those kind of stories to feel empathy in this world. You can't just read about spaceships and ogres and new made-up fantasy worlds all the time. I like to switch up genres. I don't like to always read just fantasy sci-fi, so I haven't read that many literary fiction type books. And yeah, this one's just on like my TBR because from what I understand, it's really character-driven, and I've noticed that I really like character-driven books. I like falling in love with characters or just feeling a sense of emotion towards a character. So although it's gonna be an emotionally taxing book to read, everyone's gotta pay taxes. That doesn't make any sense. I don't know what this metaphor is, but yeah, it's heart-wrenching, and I think one day my heart will be ready to get wrenched for this nice, poignant story. I don't know if it's nice. I don't know anything about it. I just know it's heartbreaking. The Lies of Loch Lamora by Scott Lynch. 736 pages. This is the fantasy, like, heist genre. Heist. A brilliant con artist and his crew scam the rich in a city of canals and corruption. That is, until they cross the wrong enemy. This is a fantasy book, but it's like a heist fantasy, which is kind of exciting. I really kind of like when fantasy books blend genres. Like I read a book called The Tainted Cup, which is actually the first book in a series. The second one's coming out this year, pretty soon. And yeah, The Tainted Cup was if Sherlock Holmes was set in a fantasy world with wide kind of cast of characters and different personalities and powers, and very interesting world. And I have no idea where it's gonna go in the second one, but very cool book in concept. So this is giving me like Ocean's 11, but fantasy, which sounds exciting. I hear it's clever, I hear it's fast paced, I hear it's witty, adventurous, a lot of world building, and it's one of those books that keeps popping up in my comments on this channel. You guys keep recommending The Lies of Loch Lamora, and I gotta be honest, it's fun to say The Lies of Loch Lamora. It really rolls off the tongue, and for that reason, I really want to read it. It just sounds like a fun book, and I was actually really surprised when I learned how long it was. 736 pages. How much heisting is going on in this book, you know what I'm saying? I'm pretty sure this is also the first book in a series. Yeah. It's in the Gentleman Bastard series, of which there are 4 books, maybe 5. I can't really tell based on what I'm looking at. And even a book that's like a prequel book. So there's like a handful of these books. So yeah, it sounds really fun and really cool, but it's another one of those things that I just have so many series that I'm reading. Like I forgot that I'm reading that series that I just pointed out to you, and that the second book is actually coming out really soon. What other series am I reading? I feel like I'm reading so many series. I'm in the throes of reading Jade City. I'm about 170 pages in the first one. A book that everyone says is slow paced compared to the second 2, but Jade City's absolutely hitting for me. I love the world, the characters. I was nervous about like how many characters were getting introduced, but the author Fonda Lee does such a great job of like reiterating and showing you the character traits of each character that it's pretty easy to understand who's who and why they're acting the way they are. So really cool story, and that I'm falling in love with, and can see it absolutely demolishing my TBR and me wanting to read the second 2 because I hear they get crazy. All that to say, like, to start another long series is a big ask, especially when I really want to read The Blade itself. I was so close to starting The Blade itself, but to be honest with you, the reason I didn't, I want to mix up the authors of the books I read. Like, I don't want to read too many male authors. I want to add female, I want to add people from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, personalities, life experiences, writing styles. I chose to read Jade City because it's written by a woman who actually does like karate and kung fu and incorporates that into her story of Jade City. So I think that's so cool. Anyway, I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but Lies of Loch Lamora sounds unreal, but I just feel like it's tough for me to start another series when I want to read The Blade itself so bad. And now, especially where Jade City, Sun Eater, Dungeon Crawler Carl, all these series that I'm like kind of becoming like knee deep in, I want to go like nipple deep in. You know, I want to get totally submerged and finish the series instead of starting another new whole series with different world building and different characters. So for now, The Lies of Loch Lamora, I probably won't read that this year. If you guys keep asking me to read it, maybe it'll bump up to the top of my TBR, who knows. Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey, 592 pages. This is the science fiction and space thriller genre. A missing girl leads a jaded detective and a rogue captain into a conspiracy that could ignite interplanetary war. These planets going to war, yo. These planets warring. And I'm not talking about Buffy. This is a high stakes and gritty space thriller that kicks off, you guessed it, another series called The Expanse. Because every sci-fi and fantasy book can't be a standalone. Why can't there just be one standalone sci-fi or fantasy book out there? They always need to be the start of a series. It's always such a time commitment. So this is supposed to be action-packed, gritty, expansive, The Expanse, cinematic, suspenseful, all those fun adjectives. I'm pretty sure it's different POVs. It's got a lot of sci-fi lingo. But all that being said, like, this keeps catching my eye when I go to the bookstore. It's a book that I want to read really bad, but I just don't know when I'll have the time to read it. I've been so close to buying it. I've had it in my hands and I just haven't bought it because I'm like, go back to reality. I'm like, why am I about to buy this? I'm not going to read this for forever. I don't know really much about this book. I haven't even really heard that many things about this book. I just keep seeing it all the time when I go to the sci-fi section, and it looks cool. It looks cool as hell. I realize that as much as I always say I read fantasy and sci-fi, I really do mostly read fantasy, and I love sci-fi. I kind of want to read more sci-fi, and this is a sci-fi. Sci-fi. How many times am I gonna say sci-fi? Ships are cool. I think space is cool. I think other creatures in space are cool. And right now, the only sci-fi that I'm reading that I can think of is the Sun Eater series and Demon in White. I will say, I am so excited to read this book too. This book could be an honorable mention, number 11 here. I am both so excited and also so not excited to start this book because it's gonna be an awesome book. Everyone tells me how good it is. The first two were like a 4 and 4.5 star kind of ish book. I know that this is gonna be a 5-star. I just have a feeling about to go down, and this is so sci-fi-y. Like, this is all really cool elements of sci-fi that I really put the groundwork in. I planted the foundational roots with the first two books, and I feel like I'm gonna earn the payoff of this last third book. I say last, it's like the third of 5 or 6. Just with entering these new world building books of sci-fi or fantasy, like to enter a new one of the Leviathan Wakes book and the Expanse series sounds like a big ask for me versus going back into a world that I already know and am excited about. Who knows what the Cielson are up to? What's my boy Hadrian gonna do in this one? What the f is Brethren? I'm terrified to think of Brethren again. There's so many things that are going on here that I'm actually getting excited thinking about it. The reason I'm not super psyched about this book is because it's 750 pages and it's gonna just slow down my momentum so much. I don't know. This could be literally the next book I read, and I could also not read it for another 5 months. And there's no in between. Back to Leviathan Wakes. Looks sick. Will eventually buy it instead of just holding it. Will read it. I'll read it eventually. It looks cool. Leviathans are cool. And I believe the author is 2 people who, like, this is like their pseudonym when they're together. So yeah, that is it. That's the video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you guys think about these 10/11 book series that I really want to read, but they're just so damn long. And I'm just not built like that quite yet with my attention span, or maybe I am, and I'm just making excuses. But yeah, let me know in the comments which of these 10 series I should bump up to the top of my TBR. Look who decided to come to Papa. Look who decided to come to Papa. Hey guys, it's me, Howie, Phil's dog. You should subscribe if he hits this jump shot. Oh, that's a good idea, Howie. That's it. All right, you gotta subscribe if I hit this. No restrictive sleeves today. These are actually pretty loose. All right, so I guess you gotta subscribe now. Howie makes the rules. I just live by them.